Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the Spore API. I must start by saying that this webinar will be recorded. So if you have any particular concerns about your name, details, and presence being shared for data protection, we kindly request that you leave the session. I repeat, this session will be recorded. The presentation that you'll see today will be published on the Spore portal, and the recording of the webinar will be shared via the EMA YouTube channel later on. While the presentation is ongoing, we kindly request that all the participants keep their microphones mute. And if you have any particular questions with regards to what you're hearing, you're welcome to write it in the chat, as we will try to address them as the presentation goes on. At the end, there will be a specific break where you're still able to ask any question that hasn't been answered. So the webinar today will be led by our colleagues Adrian Costiano, and I'll pass the word on to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Without further delay, we can start. So basically, the subject of today's presentation is to talk about the Spore API, the one that refers to access to the OMS and RMS, and what is the process to request access and how to use it. There will be a demonstration of how it works, plus some tips on how to use it. So the first part will be indeed, we'll explain the process, how to request access to the Spore API, and what are the requirements, where it's available, access to any help and support about any questions you might have. And then we'll move into a bit more technical presentation about API resources available to you, what are the concepts, and then, as I mentioned already, the API demo and tips about how to use it. So the main parts of getting access to the Spore API are the documents that are available on the Spore portal, the access to the EMA account management portal that you should be aware of, and of course, if there are any questions or any issues, you can address it with the EMA Service Desk portal. On the Spore web UI, which is accessible to everybody without any login, you can actually find various documentations, both business and technical. It's under documents and then select view, and then it's split into documentation and business. And there are plenty of documents there for you to familiarize with the details of API. In terms of the EMA account management portal, these are the EMA application that basically provides functionality for you to manage your accounts and password and request access to the various EMA applications, including Spore. And for access to Spore API, it's needed basically access to both production and environment and UAT. UAT is where you will need to provide some information, do tests, and complete a set of a list of tests that are needed for us to assess your understanding of how to use the Spore API. And any questions you might have or issues. I was mentioning about the EMA Service Desk portal. This is where you can raise tickets or questions about any things that are not clear to you, and we'll aim to answer as soon as possible. This is a diagram of what is needed for you to require access to the Spore API, and then we will go into more details of each part of this process of getting a full access. What you need is, first of all, to register using the EMA account management portal, and so As I was mentioning, first thing, you need to access to the EMA account management portal. You have to self-register and provide the details, and then go into the EMA UAT environment to do the same thing. That is requested because you will need to complete a Spore API access request form. The form is available on the EMA on the Spore API, Spore Web UI on the Spore portal. It can be downloaded, or it can be provided also by our service desk. You will see the form has some requirements about what kind of information you need to provide in there, and you need to confirm the usage of the API. Once you complete this form, you need to raise a service desk request to require a Spore API access and attach the form that you completed. And then you will need, in fact, once that it's provided, then you'll need to go and in UAT you have to compile a test case evidence to show that Spore API works for you, and we need to see in there the various response that is received in your system from Spore UAT. And we can discuss, of course, via tickets if you have any questions about things that are needed to be done. Once this test case evidence is provided, then the EMA process the request and grants Spore API access to production. So if we go a bit more into the details of each step of the process, when you register for the in EMA account management portal to the production environment, we recommend that you include your organization name plus the keyword API, because the system will use these first and second names to generate a username that it's meaningful and is constructed from those two values, and that will simplify the identification. You need to provide a unique email address that will be used for this specific API username, and we do recommend do not use anyone else's personal email because they might need to use it in the future to self-register themselves on the registration portal. So this email address should be dedicated for the API username. You need to choose the right organization to affiliate with in EMA account management portal. And if the organization doesn't exist, you need to submit a change request for the organization to be created in OMS. And once this process to self-register is basically done, you need to request an industry user role via the same EMA account management portal to industry role or NCA translator on NCA role, depending on the type of organization that you belong to. And the requirement is that this organization will need to have a super user already registered. So there are some smaller prints here just to reinforce the point about the fact that you need, even if you have a registered user, for instance, someone in your organization already has access to a Spore Web UI with valid user credential, you need to have a dedicated Spore API user for the access. That has to be affiliated to the same organization, so you can see via the API, if needed, the corresponding change request, and submit change request if needed. The second step is to, once you register basically to production with a username, you will need to repeat the same process into the UAT environment. But this registration process is slightly more simplified. You need the same thing to provide a username, to provide a name and first name and second name. So accordingly, the username is constructed. All that part stays. However, because it's a UAT environment, if your organization does not exist, you can choose any available organization for the purpose of testing. And here you will not need to have a super user assigned to your organization before you can submit an industry user or NCA accordingly, or NCA user role. After that, then you will need to perform some certain test cases in a dedicated test or UAT environment. We definitely recommend that you don't send it from any of your production environment to our UAT. We need to separate this the test from production. So you need to have, as I said, and it's specified here, a dedicated test environment. One comment to be made is we are aware that some of you use a specific software, possibly provider, to connect and get information from the API. And if that is the case, then obviously you will not need to perform test cases. However, you will see later that we still need to see the evidence, the original evidence from the software provider. The next step number 3, is for you to complete the Spore API access request form. The first tab, which is refers to the access request, and that has to be completed before submitting the request to for Spore API. And the tabs which are mentioned, test cases for RMS and OMS test cases, can be completed before or during the request for the Spore API access. But the first step is to complete the first tab of the form, and once you complete it, you then need to raise a ticket via the EMA service desk request, attach the access request form completed, and then EMA will process and validate the first tab and confirm that this is compliant with our request. Once that is done, we will need you to compile the test case evidence for the API that you intend to use, be it OMS or RMS or both, because we need to verify that the integration between your test environment and our UAT environment works without any impact on the future production access. All the tests should be performed here in UAT to confirm that it's working fine before any access can be granted to production. Again, as mentioned before, if you use a software provider that allows you access to the Spore API, and that software provider already carried out test cases, you still need to submit the evidence of the test execution and of your relationship with the software provider. However, you do not need to carry out the test cases yourself. So you need to relay with the software provider to give us this information. Once the test cases are compiled, and you need to either update the same service desk request, or you can raise a new one to request access to Spore API. EMA will validate the review and validate the test cases that you submitted, and if everything is according to our expectations, we will grant access to production. This is just a slide reminding which are the actors and stakeholders that are needed for granting access to Spore API. Being at the top, it's you, the industry users or NCAs users, and who can offer you help from EMA via the EMA Service Desk portal is the point of contact for any issues or questions you might have, which will be answered either by the Spore data stewards or our technical support. This is the end of the process in terms of getting access to the Spore API. As mentioned, the form is available on the portal on Spore Web UI, and also our service desk will have access to it, so you can get it from either sources. and the process needs to be followed as described here. The second part of the presentation, it's about the API in itself. What are the resources available to you from a technical point of view, and also what a short demo of how API works. There are various documentations available on the web, on the Spore Web UI. I have provided here the links to all of them. You can either use this link or you simply browse the Spore Web UI and you get them directly from there. The Spore API specification, it's in terms of details about how Spore API works. This is the most important document because it is a fairly long document. It's about 98 pages, but it contains a lot of information of the specification of the Spore API for both OMS and RMS. It does contain some examples and describes the list of all the available endpoints that are available via the Spore API. You notice here that I mentioned it's a Spore API v1. This is basically to differentiate from the Spore API v2, which will be available later this year and refers to SMS and PMS. What we are talking about today is the Spore API v1, which is specifically for RMS and OMS. This document of Spore API specification should be made available to your developers, the ones that will basically code any connection and connectivity to our Spore API. Another document that is available is the Xsd Schema, and that describes the data format that the various different payloads must conform to, both as an input as an output for the calls to the endpoints. Again, this together with the Spore API specification should be made available to your developer. A third document that we made available for you, and that is added as a new document recently, it contains the Spore integration patterns, which contains descriptions of how to combine multiple calls to achieve some specific business scenarios, and it's recommended again to be read in case you need to understand more of this of combining multiple calls to get the information that you need out of Spore API. We also included as a document some sample payloads, and that allows you to understand how the payloads are constructed, and this it's just an example. It's not a full catalog in any way. It's just an example, so we can basically you understand how it works. The Spore API. And finally, of course, is the Spore Web UI, which is an extension of the API to provide a more user-friendly interface. And this in itself, it's a good tool if you want to analyze the endpoint usage, because you can use the various developer tools of the browsers, and that would allow you to see what sits behind the Spore Web UI, what are the API calls which are made behind the scenes once various operations are done in the Spore Web UI. As a help for you, we included here some resources and that can be used in order for you to analyze and submit the API, such as Postman, which is a graphical user interface if you want to debug your HTTP calls and to understand the composition of the payloads. But these are more dedicated to the developers. They would basically understand how to use this. Another option is the SOAP UI, which allows you to test. You can even automate testing if you want via the SOAP UI. and other 2 more resources that are quite useful to capture various network traces in case you want to debug the calls or you have issues and you need to analyze them. These are in any way, they are not necessarily recommended. We know they are available there, and we know that they work and would help you to develop your integration with the Spore API. Some concepts again and some details about the Spore API. One thing to mention is that the Spore API v1, the basic authentication is the over HTTPS, is the only supported mode that exists currently. OAUs may be inspected in the future, and we can look at it in the future, but at the moment it's only as a basic authentication. You will need, of course, the authorization username and password via the EMA account management portal in order to access the Spore web UI and allow you to submit or to read in any way the API endpoints. The versioning, you'll notice that all the service call include a version in the call in the endpoint that you access. The ones for RMS and OMS include the keywords v1 to specify this is version 1, and once the SMS and PMS API is available, that will be version 2. The 2 versions are not compatible. V2 for OMS, for SMS and PMS are FHIR compatible, and they are not compatible with the version 1. We do plan to maintain V1 for the foreseeable future. There is no plan to in any way to make that unavailable. There are various concepts that just you need to understand. For instance, about the resources, the verbs, the representation. You need to all this information is available in the Spore API specification and, of course, in the Xsd Schema. And then the main set of verbs that you will notice in the Spore API are the list and terms for RMS, organizations, locations for OMS. All of these are always UTF-8 encoded. These resources can be represented both in XML or JSON, or of course zip may be used if you want to download specific files. In terms of the actions that you can use via the HTTP are the standard post, put, get, and delete, which are used to create, update, retrieve and resources. And the status codes that we provide are either success or failure with equivalent codes that's for each of them. And in terms of resources for RMS and OMS, you'll see that, as I mentioned earlier, for OMS we have the main concepts being organization, location, change request, and document. RMS do have slightly more because we have also apart from the basic list and term, we have translations. We can have subscriptions, tags, and even preferred names for the terms. And I will try to show you a quick demo of the API for. We're gonna start with OMS. I'll show you how you can get the organization location, how the searches are done, how you can get the information. Plus, we can go through the tips in order for you to understand a bit more. I'll try to share a separate screen, so I hope you can see it. So this, for instance, it's extracted from our Spore UAT system, the one that you will use for the testing. And a very simple call to the organization's endpoint. looks like this. It might look complicated, but in fact it's not. What you can see here is that if I want to call the organizations, automatically I have some certain parameters already defined right in the header of the XML. The default page size of a call in OMS it's 20. That can be changed, and I'll show you. It's fairly simple, and you find out, for instance, what I search for here is for all organizations. I wanted to see the summary of that. It tells you straight away that we have 30,755 organizations, the result of the API call. And a key part of using pages is the fact that you are provided with a search token. You can find it here right in the header where it says search token, and it gives you a specific code. And that search token can be used to browse to the following pages. So this would allow you to, the developers, to basically allow move from one page to the other. You can modify the page size if you want, but no more than 200 for the OMS. In terms of organizations or locations. And if you program this, you can browse through the entire set of organizations or of the searches that you might provide. What I look for here is literally all organizations. Another example of the is very sensitive. I want to show you the next example. As I said, you can specify in the API call if you want to have a different page size. The maximum possible it's 200. If you try to call more to specify a number higher than 200, you will get an error. So there is no way you can do that. To go for more, and then that would allow you basically to make less calls for if you are capable of basically processing more XMLs with up to 200 organizations in one page. Another example in terms of the API, you can go directly to a specific organizations, which allows you to see the information of the organization plus all the location that particular organization might have. And this would basically allow you to access directly an organization rather than browse. There are various search functionality that, for instance, if you want, you can search in the API via a specific organization name. It can be either an exact organization name, or it can be with wall characters. Like in this case, I searched for an organization that I created for test purpose yesterday. I know that it starts with my in a specific way, and I know there is actually only one of that, and the system simply returns the only organization that matches this this criteria. You can combine searches, for instance. But before we go that, you can actually, another option, instead of searching by name, you can search by the org ID. It can be an exact one, as I showed before. However, it can also use wild characters. So in this case, what I did, I wanted all the organizations that start with this specific 6 numbers. And you see that the system returns 8 of them. You can modify this in any way you want in terms of the org ID. If you want, you can use less or more characters if you want to search for specific organization IDs. The next example. So this is an example of combining, for instance, if you want multiple parameters. You can search, for instance, an organization ID starting with the specific numbers, and you want all the active ones, for instance, that would return you, in this case, 2,620 organizations. So as I said, you can combine even more of these parameters. You need to use the specific keyword that will join the parameters and provide the final query that will be passed to the system. Another example will follow. This is about locations, for instance, because so far we look at the organizations. The parameters for location work in absolutely the same way. You can identify directly location ID by looking at, if you know the exact ID of that. At the location level, you see the various parameters that are assigned with the location. If there are any mapping to any of the internal systems, you can see the address of the location, and of course the organization that it belongs to. So that is for location. And the another example, as I said, you can search for location that start with specific number. There are these keywords, for instance, in case of the organization, the parameter to specify the organization ID is org-id. If in case of location is org-location-id. All these endpoints and keywords are described in detail in the Spore API specification document that I mentioned to you earlier. And that, as I said, should be the first point for you to go and try to understand how the Spore API works. I will come back to the presentation. Because I want to go through some... I will stop sharing. Yeah, great. So there are various tips that we wrote here in a summary. For instance, you need to keep in mind that if you want to access the API, you must have an API role. So having only a Spore user that can access the Spore web UI is not enough to get access to the API. You will have an error return, an HTTP 401 error, without the specific API role. As I mentioned earlier, the maximum number of organization locations is 200 on a single page, with the default being 20. Any number under 20 or under 200 can be specified if you have various requirements internally, and you control that by the page size parameter. You can use the page size with the value 0 if you want to get all the organizations that are to be retrieved. However, this page size 0 cannot be provided in conjunction with any other query parameter apart from versions or versions true or versions false, because it's a heavy call, and the search it's not working with of any other parameter apart from page size equals 0. We are aware that the history of some of the organizations at the moment does not work properly in OMS API. For instance, if you search for specific organizations and you write versions is true, does return always the latest version rather than all of them. This is being addressed as we speak, and we should have it fixed as soon as possible. We are aware of it. As I said, it's a long process to have it finished. However, we are close to the end of that. You have another thing to you can have via the OMS API. The address, such as some attributes such as the address, can be found in multiple languages. If the value is there, it can be accessed in your language. And for some of you that you might already use the OMS, you might have noticed that sometimes lock ID starts with the keywords ORQ rather than lock. Please do not consider this as a location, because starting with the ORQ, the location means it's still in provisional status. It has not been approved and therefore should not be used or downloaded, because the final location ID, it will be different. The next part of it should be for the RMS. I need to start sharing the my browser so I can go through a bit of the API, if you can bear with me. Right, so about RMS. As I mentioned earlier, basically the keywords for RMS are the list and terms, and all the information is in the Spore API specification. But if you are, for instance, to go through a bit of the information that it's how the API Spore RMS API works. This is an example. If I want to access a specific list, you use the endpoint list, and then you can have the list ID. You can either go to display all the terms of the list. In our case, this list has only 3 terms. You can see it right in the header of the payload that the total items in the of terms in the list is 3. It gives you the information what is the list status, and it provides you with summaries of the terms, the term IDs, and the status, if it's current or not, and then when it was modified, and the languages that the term names are in also. And if I go lower, you can see that the term a term can have translations for the term name in multiple languages. All of them are can be accessed and are available via the API. And I wanted to show. There is also for each of the, by default, the this call to terms provides the latest version, and you have one of the keywords says here version number. The version numbers are specific to the terms, and you can access, if you want, the term itself with more than the latest version. You can specify versions equal true, and then it will provide you all the versions that the term had in the past. If we go to the next example, this is list that has a lot more terms. It has 264. This is actually the country list, and one thing you might notice here is, in fact, that I'm already past the 200 value that was allowed in OMS. This is because in RMS the total number of terms that can be displayed in one page is 1000. It was designed this way because the list in OMS can be quite big, and therefore the number of terms that can be displayed in one page, it's higher. The same information, it's available, and of course you can, if you want, specify the if you want to go to a lower page size, you can specify it here, and or you can go to higher if the list has more terms. The RMS API also allows for various searches in the same way that the OMS does. You can search, for instance, by the name of the list. or you can use wild characters. If you are not sure, in this case I use the age range, which is the list, one of the list IDs that we have. And obviously if it starts with age, it returns to me only a single list, and it provides me the information of the list itself. You can also access the various translations if you want of a specific term. But all this information is available in the Spore API specification document. And also, if you combine that with the examples that are in the payload examples file, would give you a lot of information in terms of how to design the Spore API. If I return to the presentation, I will go through the merges to explain how the merges are working in and how they are available in via the API. Right. Before that, also as a tips, things to consider, it's when you access to the test environment specifically, is that there are, and this you need to pass it to your developer, that our certificates that are in the test environments are signed by the EMA certificate authority, an internal one, and therefore you might want to I don't know, ignore if you want the security warning that your browser or your client might provide. We mentioned earlier in the presentation that you need about the unaffiliated users. It was right at the beginning of the process. And the fact that the main purpose of this unaffiliated user is to be able to create one single change request to create their organization in case your organization doesn't exist. That would allow you to complete the registration process. I mentioned about the pagination and how to use the page and the page size attributes, and of course the search token. And these are fairly standard API parameters that can be used by your developer. The maximum results on a page is 1000 for RMS, and it's 200 for OMS. And also what we mentioned here about in case there are bad requests, and then you can go through the payload examples document or to the network capture of the web UI if that would help you to get the payload right. And of course you can also raise a ticket to our service desk in case you need help to understand how it works. The validation of the query parameter at the moment, if there are incorrect query parameter, the system simply ignores it. This is a valid implementation of the API, but in future we might address this, and then we'll offer a comprehensive query parameter validation. Right, the API and the merge process. What happens is that from time to time, an organization or a location will need to be merged because of various reasons, business reasons. And when we merge an organization or a location, when they are merged, they never disappear. In fact, what happens is when I merge an organization A with an organization B, only one of them survives as the golden record, and that is the one with the lowest organization ID. All the other organization B or even more will be all linked to the golden record. They will never be inactivated nor deleted, but when you call for for the organization, it will always point to the one that remains as the golden record. I'll have some screenshot in the next slide to make it clear. In terms of explaining, so basically, if we consider that organization A that is the one with the lowest organization org ID and becomes a golden record, it means that when I search for organization B, this org ID still works. However, it points to the organization A. This was decided in the beginning to ensure stability of possible references from external system. And therefore, every action referring a non-surviving merge record will keep on working and returning the data that belongs to the golden record. And the same process and concept applies to the locations too. And I hope you can see this. I mean, this is an example of two organizations that I created yesterday, and shows the what happens in case of a merge. If we consider the organization A at the top, the organization B at the bottom, I merge the two, and when I call the organization B at the bottom, it points me to the surviving organization, which is the organization A. However, in the body of the XML, you can see that it tells me that originally had both of them. However, as I said, when you call the organization B, it will always point to the surviving one, what you call the golden record. In order for you to help getting the organization and understand that in fact the organization did not disappear, but it points to the new one, we provide some example on what should be done and what is the workaround that you can implement locally. This screen and the next is the example for both organizations and locations. So in case, for instance, if you want to synchronize your local system with OMS, after you get a specific organization modified after a date and time, and then if your for each organization ID, for you to perform an API request, if the organization ID is equal to the main organization ID in the response, then obviously this is the surviving organization. And if it's that of a non-survivor, then this means that it was merging the organization ID in the response. And this is the example that in pseudocode for you to help you to understand that how you can work. This is also provided in a more graphical form in the Spore integration pattern, the workaround of the merge process and how it can be handled in terms of the API. So you can download that document and see it, as I said, in the schema that is available there. And the second, the last slide is about the workaround that can be implemented for the locations. It works in the same way as the organization, and this would help you for if you want to how to implement it locally. As I said, this presentation, as Isabel said in the beginning, this presentation will be made available for you to download if you want to look at it at a further later date. And I think this was the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Adrian. We have tried to address some of the questions on the chat. I'm not sure they were to the mark. So if you have any leftover questions, please raise your hand and we will try to take them in the order that the hands are raised.
I do have one raised hand here. It's from Patricia. Patricia, if you have the question, please, I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Thank you for clarification. Thank you.
Colleagues who raised the questions in the chat, was everything clarified? I see a hand from Valeris. Not sure that's the name. Can you unmute him?
It's about the OMS API. I have noticed that some organizations had only one address line. Does this follow some kind of standard when these are filled, or are there any consistency checks on your side? So what can we trust from the business standpoint if these lines are consistent between organizations?
Thank you. So here is Deborah Braga speaking. I'm the OMS business lead, so I'll try to answer your question. So you've seen this presentation from the technical side. We have a similar presentation where we go through all the OMS business rules, how we use them, what we have, and in practical sense, how do we use them on the day-to-day basis. I'm happy to share this with you, but in a nutshell, yes, we have consistency. We try to apply the same standards to all records, either organization name level or location details. To the added value when we talk about locations, I'm not really sure. I would have to have more information about the record that you're trying to get more explanation. But just to tell you that to help us validating a location, we count with the help from each national postal service. So all our locations, they are created and they are validated. They can be even enriched with information provided by each national postal service. So when we are mastering a location, we have only two mandatory fields: address line 1 and country. All the rest, they will be populated by the national postal service if relevant. But those two values, they always have to be, it's a technical requirement. We cannot create a record without those two values. Now, I'm not sure if this answers your question or if you're trying to get more information. Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, we have another question from Philip. Philip, please ask your question.
I have a question regarding access of the data, basically, the API. So, is there going to be necessary third-party program to access data, or can we access it through Spore itself? What's the way to access data? Do we need a specific application, something that's built in-house, or a third-party application, or?
You don't need, I think this is, it's Adrian again, you don't, there is no specification, no requirement from us. You can use either a third party if you decide to use a third party software that allows you to connect to the API, or you can build your own solution in-house. The Spore API access is the same. It's your decision how you want to access it. Maybe some companies do have an IT department that allows them to build a solution in-house. Absolutely fine with that. Others maybe decide to outsource and use a third party. Again, we are fine with that too. That's why the form that we publish caters for both. We can't recommend either. It is basically up to you how you, and up to your internal decisions how you want to connect to the Spore API.
But some kind of software will be necessary to connect to it.
You need some kind of software in order to get the information, but there are some open source. What I showed you, for instance, is the via the web, via a browser. A browser is not necessarily a software that you can use. You need a specific software, but any development, any IT developer would should know what to use.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have one more question from Alexander. Please ask your question.
Hello, thank you. I'm Alexander from Xsd. We already developed this Spore connector in-house. And have a question regarding this API changes in December and upcoming. How it will impact for the existing API endpoints, and should we expect changes in existing connector that we already implemented? And another question is, can we get some more details, and also the model of the contact details for the locations? Because based on inspection, we understand that there can be multiple contacts, but for each contact there can be multiple, for example, email address and something like that, so that we can better understand and model it based on the model that is in EMA, so that we can implement correct mapping.
I'll try to answer the first part of your question. If you refer to December as the time when the Spore API v2, which refers to SMS and PMS, will be made available, I mentioned in the presentation that that is completely separate from v1, which is the OMS and RMS, and the presentation today was about that. And there are no plans to change or modify the v1 for OMS and RMS. And that will be supported for the foreseeable future. We have no plan to stop supporting that. It will work as is, and then when you want to access the SMS and PMS, you need to use the endpoint starting with v2.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I can try to address the second part of your question, which from my understanding, as part what we're doing to integrate with the other GMDP, with the inspection database, we're not importing any contact details. The only thing that we're doing, we are importing from other GMDP into OMS some key reference to point out to a certain record in other GMDP, and once they go live, they will connect indeed using this API functionality, and they will retrieve the data. So any contact details that are today in other GMDP, they will not be imported into OMS. So in OMS, just an ad hoc in OMS, we have indeed contact details under a certain location, but bear in mind that we do not control, we do not validate those contact details, and on top of that, those contact details are public. So what we advise always any user that wants to add any contact detail into OMS to be aware that those contact details will be made public and everyone will have access to them. I hope this addresses your second part of the question.
Yes, partially. I just wanted, for example, the object model, so that we can also, but we can request that later on to the service desk.
One point from my side, the data model of OMS is also published on the web UI. There is specific documents showing that, and there are absolutely no plan to change it. So as is published there, it will stay.
Okay, thanks.
I don't see any more hands raised. So if there is any more questions, please raise your hand so I can see you. Okay, looks like that is all. So there is no more questions.
So there's one last question.
Yes, one more question. Please, go to live, please.
If we, the PowerPoint will be shared at the end of the presentation, huh?
The presentation will publish in our...
At the end of the webinar, I'm sorry, yes.
It will shortly be published in our Spore portal, both in RMS and OMS side.
Great, okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, if you would like to raise another question, if you click next to your name, you will have the option raise your hand. So if you would like to Azik, please ask your question.
So
Yes.
using this API, is it planned to support update of this data via API maybe in future?
Hello. So via the API, you can access the data, you can use it, but you can only submit change requests. You will never be allowed to directly change the data yourself. That's not part of the process we use.
Okay.
Colleagues, if you're asking questions in the chat, sometimes it's not clear what exactly you want to ask. So this is the opportunity to raise your hand and ask it. We will not be monitoring the chat anymore. We have time for questions and oral discussion. Nope. So if there's no more hands, I believe we've covered all the questions. We thank you for your participation. And if you have any further questions, you can always contact us via the EMA service desk. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. See you at the next opportunity.